And Commissioner Seggos joins us now. Welcome. It's good to see you again.
Tom, great to be back.
Nice to have you back.
Thank you.
You were here in town this week, as we just saw, as the keynote speaker at a transportation summit held here in Plattsburgh that focused a lot on transportation of the future, with an emphasis on electric buses and vehicles and even airplanes being tested in the skies over Plattsburgh. You talked about how that shift to green transportation is a big part of what New York State is doing to address climate change. You talked about the state's new Climate Act, the Climate Action Council working for more than 2 years to come up with a plan to make New York cleaner and greener. And now the state is holding hearings on that and having people weigh in on that.
That's right, Tom. I mean, throughout the pandemic, we didn't miss a beat on our climate readiness. I mean, we've been talking now for 2 years since the law was signed in 2019. We've been talking for 2 years about how to craft the economy of the future, taking it all into account, creating the scoping plan, which helps to crystallize the state's direction over the next 20 plus years. So we've taken extraordinary efforts to assemble a really robust body of individuals, experts, who've given us advice on every aspect of the economy and how to make this transition in a way that won't lose jobs in New York. In fact, that creates the economy of the future and gives us a sense that we can do this. When you come to a place like Plattsburgh, which is building the economy of the future through its clean transportation businesses, we start to think about what that might look like over the course of 20 or 30 years and how Nova buses being made here can be creating the electric buses that we need down at MTA or at any of the other transportation authorities around the state. And you see that similar energy being put into some of the really cutting edge technologies on power generation, right? New York's now a leader on offshore wind. We are the leader in offshore wind in the U.S. Solar, we're in the top 3 in the U.S. Battery storage, onshore wind, housing efficiency, right? Making houses more energy efficient. All of these things are being taken into account right now as we roll into this public comment phase. And
you talked about 2 of the big ones, housing and emissions from vehicles. Are those the 2 biggest polluters?
We went into this thinking that transportation was going to be the #1 source of pollution, because it generally is as a rule of thumb around the world. But we obviously wanted to do the science, do the research on this, and do the analysis. What we discovered is housing is actually the largest source of emissions. Transportation is a close second. 28% of the emissions come from the transportation sector. So that's, your cars, trucks, buses, airplanes. Interestingly, transportation is also perhaps the easiest to change, because usually cars only last 10 or 12 years, right? Your buses change out every 10 years. So you can think about a future that you shift very quickly into electrification, whereas a house sits for 100 years. And you've got to have a strategy for what a new house looks like, and you got to have a strategy for what a retrofit looks like, and how you incentivize those 2 things along the way.
And that's what's happening now, especially with transportation. You're looking at the next 10, 20 years.
Right.
You said at the Transportation Summit, the goal is to have buses, school buses, fleets of state vehicles electric by 2035?
That's right. Governor Hochul is committed to 100% electric vehicles by 2035 here in New York, 100% electric school buses by 2035, medium and heavy duty vehicles, so like the box trucks on the street and fleet trucks like that, will become fully electric by 2035. So we're talking about a fairly short window, in the grand scheme of things, right? Only 12, 13 years to make that shift, given how long these trucks usually last. We have to begin doing that right now, and that's what we're in the middle of right now, literally in the closing days of the budget negotiations.
Do we have the infrastructure in place, or is that a big part of it, getting that infrastructure in place?
We're going to be building the plane while we fly it, right? I mean, it's literally, we're doing everything all at once. So the governor wants to put $1 billion into the infrastructure, the charging infrastructure. We're NYPA, New York Power Authority, and several of the other transmission companies, $20 billion investment in modernizing our transmission system and our grid, right, to be ready for the electric needs of the future. So it's all happening at the same time. You see more EVs on the street, right? But you don't see as much as the action that's going on behind the scenes.
Are the cars there now to buy, and will the infrastructure be there for charging?
Well, it has to be, right? We know we have to hit those marks. We have to hit those emissions reduction numbers. We also know, looking at the marketplace right now, that there's an extraordinary number of EVs coming to market.
Homes pushed to go solar, or certainly get homes converted to electricity. One of the governor's big proposals this year is transmission lines, and one of those transmission lines that she's pushing and it's moving forward is to get green power, hydropower from Quebec, transmission line under Lake Champlain, the Hudson River, to metropolitan New York to supply millions of homes with electricity.
Yes, I mean, if you talk about reducing fossil fuel usage in New York City, you almost can't do it unless you bring an alternative, right? So you need big, bold projects. Offshore wind is one of those projects, right? The gigawatts that will come from clean power off the Atlantic. The other big, bold projects are those big transmission lines that we're proposing to run down the Hudson into the harbor and into ultimately powering New York City. One of those right through this area, coming down from Hydro-Quebec. It's still a proposal, right? The Department of Public Service is still considering it, but the governor is very excited about it.
The governor is also working with the legislature to add even more money to the proposed Environmental Bond Act. Now they're looking at anywhere from $4 to $6 billion. What will that do for New York and in particular for here in the Adirondacks?
Well, it's going to be a game changer. The Bond Act will be a game changer for New York, no matter the number. And the governor proposed a $4 billion Bond Act, which is an extraordinary down payment in our future. The Assembly and Senate have proposed 5 and 6 respectively. So wherever they end up in their negotiations, it's an extraordinary commitment to New York. We were talking about the investments in climate mitigation, right? Keeping our emissions profile on the downward trajectory. The other side of that is adaptation. We know that there are problems that we're facing already in New York. Extraordinary storms, extraordinary weather, directly impacting communities all across the state. The Bond Act is designed to go in and make communities more climate resilient by using things that actually work, like expanding wetlands and parks and green space, like emissions reduction strategies, replacing culverts that typically flood. What we would see through with additional resources is a chance to plan for spreading that water out, modernizing the way that we handle water, eliminate those kinds of problems.
A lot of people may think the conversion, the shift to combating climate change would potentially be a job killer. But at the summit, you said it's just the opposite.
We talk about this transition from a fossil fuel economy into a renewable economy. And the numbers are staggering. It's hundreds of thousands of new jobs created. That's new jobs over existing. And for every fossil fuel job lost, it's 9 created. So we're dealing with something right now. If we do this right, granted, will be an extraordinary challenge, right, to do this over the course of 20 years, to make this transition happen. But if we do it right, it's a significant boost to our economy, and it's hundreds of thousands of jobs gained in New York.
The state is moving ahead with work on the Adirondack Rail Trail and plans to pull up 34 miles of track between Lake Placid, Tupper Lake, and create a multi-use recreation trail. It's been in the planning stages for several years now. After a few delays to get some issues taken care of, is it to the point now where that project is moving ahead?
It is moving ahead. We just got jurisdiction over the rail trail from the Department of Transportation. So they did all the really hard work of ripping up the ties and the rails. Now we have a rail bed that we get to work with over the next 2 years or so, and turn that really into a world-class rail trail. And we will do that. This rail trail that runs currently from Lake Placid all the way to Tupper Lake and goes right through Saranac is going to be an extraordinary recreational and economic resource for the region. So the work's going to start this year. We're working with the Office of General Services as our contractor to get that work going. The trail will be open while we're building. So everyone who's interested should just follow the signs. We're going to have plenty of signs up about where to go and where not to go. But we expect this is going to be a real boost to the North Country.
Hiking trails are popular in the Adirondacks. So many visitors have been coming. It has become a real problem. The trails are packed. Many of the most popular high peaks trails are overcrowded. Parking lots overflowing with cars. Last year, the state tried an experiment, a reservation system to get a parking spot in the lot at the Adirondack Mountain Reserve off Route 73. Did that work? Did that help a lot and help address the problem?
It did, Tom. I mean, that program at the AMR that we did last year, this pilot program that helped to get cars off of the street, achieved its purpose. We knew we had to do something about it. We knew that we had a willing partner at AMR. They're willing to create this reservation system so that people could safely park and access the backcountry. It worked very well. We very much approached it from an adaptive perspective. So we run it for a few weeks, see what problems we had, tinker with it a little bit, right? Keep improving the program. And we just announced that we'll be doing it now again for this coming year. We expect extraordinary interest in it. I think we have something like 21,000 folks who have already indicated their interest in being part of this parking experiment, now permanent. And with the Canadians coming back into the U.S., which is a good thing for our economy, we'll be communicating to them in both English and French Canadian.
Shuttle buses and other steps still being considered in addition to this?
Yes, correct. We're working very well with Essex County on a shuttle bus system that will be running up and down the Route 73 corridor and ultimately getting people from parking lots to their trailheads.
There's an invasive species that is threatening Lake Champlain, coming up through the Champlain Canal. The round goby, is it a real threat to Lake Champlain?
It is a concern. We do not want the round goby in Lake Champlain. It has shown itself to be a habitat disruptor. Where else it's been. It's disrupted the food chain and ultimately outcompeted other types of fish that are, not just important for the environment, but also important for the economy. So we're taking this very seriously. The prospect of it reaching the lake is something that I think we don't want to acknowledge is possible, but it is possible. We're taking it very seriously and working very closely with the Canal Corporation as to the steps we will need to take to prevent this from happening. So we'll be making some announcements soon about that.